Welcome on board the Rich Planet Starship, broadcasting from somewhere high above the Earth. I'm Richard D. Hall. On today's show, the subject under discussion is one which may not sit comfortably with many people, especially if you are eating your tea. It is a subject which is very close to my heart, that of animal mutilation. Although mutilation is probably not the right word, most people are not aware that domestic, farm and wild animals are found dead in places all over the world with inexplicable surgical wounds on their bodies. This is a subject which has been actively covered up by successive governments and media organisations. Many researchers believe that there is a link between UFOs and animal mutilation. Before you roll your eyes, there is a vast body of evidence to back up this hypothesis. Here to discuss the subject is Mike Freebury, who has just published his first groundbreaking, or should I say back-breaking book on the subject, Killers on the Moor. Also on board we have veteran researcher David Cayton, who is ex-RAF and ex-British Aerospace. Welcome, Mike.
Glad to be here.
And welcome, David.
Thank you. Glad to be back aboard. Thank you, Richard.
Now then, I'm very excited because of the book that you've just published, Mike, called Killers on the Moor, which charts your involvement in animal mutilation from around about the year 2000. That's when you first got involved. And I've read some of it, I haven't read all of it, and you cover various cases in your book, including Dartmoor ponies, the Dartmoor sheep cases, and you know, also you cover the whole worldwide phenomenon as well. Now, can you just start by explaining, Mike, how you first came by this subject? Because, you know, it's not your average hobby, is it, really, going around?
No, this is a particularly sinister and dark subject, as we know. I was listening to a radio broadcast in 2000. I was half listening to it, really. It was a radio phone-in on BBC Radio, and it was about government secrecy. And what suddenly drew my attention was a caller came on and began discussing an incident that had occurred on Dartmoor in 1977 when 15 Dartmoor ponies were horrifically killed. When I heard this, I was suddenly alerted and thought, goodness me, this was an incident I was familiar with. I'd heard about it at the time, but would like to know basically what happened.
So the secrecy element intrigued you?
Yes, and I didn't, at that time I was unaware of the animal mutilation problem. Mm-hmm. So I began to investigate the Dartmoor ponies incident.
And at that time you were completely unaware of UFO theories?
Only in so much that the incident itself had been propelled into the media by a relationship between UFO researchers being out on Dartmoor with Geiger counters and metal detectors, and the actual incident itself. And these reports suddenly surfaced around about 13th, 14th of July 1977.
Now it seems in this case that the media were held at bay for a few months because it actually happened a few months earlier than that.
That's correct. It happened on, it may have actually taken place on the 10th of April, but it was actually discovered on the 11th of April 1977 by a gentleman out with his family. They were walking on the moor. It's a very remote spot. It's not far from White Tor. Mm-hmm. It's about 2.5 miles from the nearest road. And this gentleman was shocked when he came across the state of these bodies. Some of them were still bleeding, some of them got broken backs, some of them were decomposing at an alarming rate.
Do you think the broken bones were possibly been dropped?
I've come to that conclusion that is the only reason that can explain those injuries.
Right.
That those animals have been dropped from a height.
And on the front cover of your book, this is actually a pony on the front cover, which is from the 1977 Dartmoor ponies case, and we can see there the jaw of the animal is stripped completely clean,
yes,
which is one of the common characteristics of these animal mutilation attacks. Can you tell us about that characteristic, Mike?
in a lot of cases, particularly in America, and if you look at in the book, there's a picture from America provided by Linda Moulton Howe of the horse called Lady that basically has all the flesh stripped from the skull right down to the base of the neck, and the pony is almost identical to that. I've put both photographs in the book because if you compare one with the other, you can see the similarity.
Now, some people will say, well, there's obviously some predators have just eaten the skin off its jaw or of its head. Could that not be the case?
No, I don't believe that's the case at all.
I mean, you expand on that, David?
No. Well, there's so many cases of exactly the same. And a predator kills to eat, and all the good body parts that they would like to eat, it's not touched. Why scrape away at the head and the jaw area with very thin amount of flesh and leave the rest? That doesn't make sense at all.
And we will come on to another case with fairly incredible photographs of this same jaw strip phenomenon. Yeah. Okay, so why do you think that this was kept out of the media then for 2 whole months?
Well, the story, which was it was a massive story for the Tavistock Times, they didn't actually run with the story until the 3rd of June 1977, and it didn't appear in any of the local papers until around about that date. The interesting thing is that the incident itself then appears to have been forgotten until July 1977, when a guy called John Wise took 4 members of his group to investigate the area using Geiger counters and metal detectors. And the purpose of this apparently was to determine if a vortex from a UFO had caused the deaths of the ponies.
Right.
That basically that had drawn them up and thrown them down, and this explained the injuries. Well, I personally didn't buy that one at all.
Right.
I didn't buy it at the time, and I sort of don't buy it now.
Right.
But this occurrence with the involvement of the UFO group suddenly propelled it into the mainstream media, and they all started running with it right across the world. It appeared in a lot of countries.
For once, the media did us a favour by
Yes.
seeing a crackpot story, a loony UFO tag to it, which they like, to make it a bit of a silly article, probably.
Right.
And that blew the secrecy that the authorities were trying to keep down. That's the correct assumption of the scenario, anyway.
So suddenly this event was pulled straight back out into the media, but it seemed to die again very quickly.
Now, some people have come forward and given their own explanations other than a UFO.
Yes.
Which you explain in your book. Can you give us?
We've got a classic one from a Devon botanist that suggested that the plant bog asphodel was responsible, that the ponies had eaten this plant, which is obviously poisonous to them, made their bones brittle, and this explained all the broken bones, etc. Very sort of bizarre theory, quite frankly, and you get ponies all over Dartmoor, and I don't hear of any high incidence.
On the New Forest, for instance.
And the New Forest.
Yeah.
So that one is, in my opinion, not a very good suggestion.
Now, you focused a lot on Dartmoor throughout your research, but this is a worldwide phenomenon, David, isn't it?
Yes.
Can you just give us a picture of what countries has this occurred in, and how similar are the injuries, and specifically, because some of them are surgical in their nature.
Oh, yes. Well, the USA, apart from Britain, obviously, and all parts of Britain, from north of Scotland to Cornwall, South Americas, Latin America, Argentina, Chile, Uruguay particularly, and Brazil. We know some in Israel, Scandinavia. I would reckon, and Himalayas, I reckon pretty every country in the world has had these sort of attacks.
Right.
because it's a worldwide, global program these guys have got.
Which you would say, I mean, we'll come on to the different explanations in part 2 as to what could be happening,
Yeah.
what could be causing it. But they're surgical in nature, some of these
Yes.
operations that have
Yeah.
been done on these animals. But
Yeah.
so it's not widely known about, is it?
No.
You
No.
know, and what do you think the reason for that is? Because surely a phenomenon like this, it should be being discussed on the news, and it should be out in the open if it's something that's important. It's killing the animals of the world.
Well, I think governments have become quite adept at suppressing details of
Yes.
these attacks.
Yep.
One of the reasons for writing this book is that I hope that it will inform the public and it will raise awareness of this issue. And in so doing, hopefully we may get more cases coming forward. But it is a controversial book, I accept that, and government departments like DEFRA do not want this problem to get out into the mainstream. I'm pretty sure of that.
And that's because whatever the cause is, it's something that they don't really want people to know about.
Because they're not in control of it.
Right. Yeah.
That's partly it, yes.
And this is, I have covered this in my film Silent Killers, which David and Mike both appeared in. We made that about 2 years ago, and there are various cases discussed in there, and also the reasons for the cover-up of it and how the cover-up is perpetrated, which I've also spoken on in the past. I mean, we can go into theories of it being covered up in part 3 and how it's done, because people say, oh, how would you possibly cover that up? Well, actually, there's a whole range of techniques that can be used. Okay then, Mike, another item or case that you've written about in your book is 1978 Newquay Zoo attacks. So these actually took place in a controlled environment, effectively.
Well, yes, this is interesting because these attacks actually began in 1977, the same year as the Dartmoor ponies incident. And
Significant, that.
it's given me the opportunity to introduce the late Joan Amos, who is one of the unsung heroes of ufology. This lady managed to get an interview and a conference with 2 policemen and the zoo manager regarding the attacks at Newquay Zoo. Basically, these attacks built up. They were losing wildfowl that were being beheaded, and then it got to the stage where they lost 2 wallabies. And the incredible thing about these attacks, particularly on the wallabies, was that they were taken from quite sizable pens. They were transported to another part of the zoo. They were beheaded and exsanguinated, and nobody saw anything, nobody heard anything. The heads were never found. So this was...
You mentioned they're exsanguinated, and this is another characteristic.
Yes.
That the blood appears to be removed, and there's no blood on the ground, not a drop in cases, which was the case, which was what happened with the horse case that we investigated a while back.
Yeah.
You know, if any animal which is cut in a predatory type scenario where its heart's pumping, there's going to be blood everywhere.
Absolutely.
And so you think they actually, whoever's doing it, remove blood and take it away then? Would you?
Definitely.
With the cases that you've looked at, David?
Yes, they do. They might change its form in some way and then take it, and they do something on the spot to do that, but nobody really knows. But
And whatever they do, it allows them to make all of these incisions and procedures without leaving a drop of blood on the ground.
Yes.
Particularly removing tongue very often.
And this woman, Joan Amos, the police actually collaborated with her, even though she was a UFO researcher.
Yeah, they did, and it's remarkable when you look back. Remember, this 1977. I've got her report of the meeting with the police. It's just unfortunate that at the same time as the zoo attacks, a farm on the outskirts of Newquay had several sheep attacked and beheaded in the same way as had occurred with the wallaby, with the wallabies. The police unfortunately did not make Joan aware of that particular incident, and that's
I
unfortunate.
suppose it's the need to know kicks in, isn't it?
And this is a problem with research in this field, is you rarely have, or you will never have access to the full information, because the majority of cases aren't reported, and even the ones that are maybe hushed up. So it's just difficult to get an overall picture of everything that's going on, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
I should also say regarding the wallaby attacks, they're by no means isolated attacks, because there was also an attack up here, not in the same year, at Hope Animal Centre at Loftus in the northeast,
Right.
where a wallaby was taken, beheaded, and no rhyme nor reason given for this attack. And I've recently been given details of an attack that happened last year, where a wallaby was taken from a secure pen on an animal sanctuary near Bristol, and exactly the same thing happened. The animal was beheaded, there's no blood, and the head has not been found.
What wallabies and kangaroos, by the way, are being taken in Australia on a quite regular basis. Some were found on a
Yes.
big race course, a golf course in Melbourne.
Now, people have suggested in the past, Philip J. Corso being one of them, that this is an extraterrestrial phenomenon, that it's possible, and we will come on to the different causes and we'll look at the other explanations. But you said that you didn't accept this hypothesis of the ponies being sucked into a UFO. Well,
No,
you don't rule out an extraterrestrial hypothesis, do you, Mike? Or
I came to the conclusion during investigating the Dartmoor ponies incident that everything seemed consistent with what was happening in America, with a wave of attacks that happened in America in the 70s and still continuing, obviously, to this day. So I therefore became converted to the view that these attacks were being carried out by visitors not of this world.
right? Okay.
And I felt that the technologies that were being used suggested that.
I mean, one thing to point out is the covert nature of the attacks. That if it's
Yes.
people, there's hundreds and hundreds of cases, and no one's ever been caught
No.
red-handed or
No.
even seen.
No.
I mean, and this, and when you hear of the different reasons for this, that people come out with, I've heard that the military are to blame because they're carrying out some clandestine testing
Yeah,
scheme, which just defies belief.
yeah. Yeah, we'll come on to that in part two, Mike, and we'll also discuss some more cases from Killers on the Moor. So join us after the break.